Most people believe that ignoring someone is rude, immature, or a sign of weakness. They think that to become attractive, they must constantly prove their interest, always be available, reply immediately, and make sure the other person never questions how much they care. They fear that if they become less available, people will lose interest and walk away. But human psychology reveals something completely different. Attraction is rarely created by constant pursuit. More often, it grows in the space where emotional dependence disappears. The people who naturally attract respect, attention, and curiosity are not those who desperately seek it. They are the ones who are fully in control of their own attention. This does not mean ignoring people to manipulate them or playing childish games to make someone chase you. True attraction has nothing to do with pretending not to care. It begins when your happiness no longer depends on another person's response. Human beings are naturally drawn toward emotional strength because emotional strength communicates confidence. When someone sees that your peace remains unchanged, whether they text you or ignore you, whether they approve of you or reject you, they begin seeing you differently. You stop looking like someone searching for validation and start looking like someone who already knows their worth. One of the deepest truths about human nature is that people rarely value what feels endlessly available. The mind is naturally attracted to what feels meaningful, limited, and difficult to obtain. This principle influences almost every area of life. We appreciate rare opportunities more than common ones. We protect things we fear losing more than things we assume will always remain. Relationships quietly follow the same psychological pattern. When your attention is available every second of every day, it slowly becomes expected instead of appreciated. But when your attention is directed with purpose instead of desperation, it gains value because people recognize it is a choice, not a necessity. This is why constantly chasing attention often produces the opposite result. Imagine someone who always sends the first message, always starts every conversation, always adjusts their schedule for someone else, and immediately responds every time their phone vibrates. At first, this behavior may appear caring, but over time, it quietly changes the psychological balance. The other person stops seeing your attention as something valuable because they no longer have to earn it. They become certain that your presence will always be there regardless of how much effort they invest. And certainty often removes appreciation. Human psychology does not intentionally devalue people. It simply adapts to whatever becomes predictable. Predictability is one of the greatest enemies of attraction. When people already know exactly how you will react, when they know you will always be available, always forgive, always explain yourself, and always seek their attention, there is very little left for the mind to wonder about. Curiosity disappears because nothing remains uncertain. Attraction, however, often grows through curiosity. The mind naturally becomes interested in people whose lives do not revolve around gaining approval, not because they are mysterious on purpose, but because they are deeply invested in something greater than constant validation. Think about the people who quietly command attention wherever they go. They rarely compete for it. They don't interrupt conversations to prove themselves. They don't desperately seek recognition from everyone around them. Instead, they carry themselves with calm confidence because their attention is focused on their own purpose. They have goals to pursue, standards to protect, and a life that continues moving forward whether someone notices them or not. That quiet independence creates a powerful psychological effect. Others begin respecting their time because they clearly respect it themselves. Another reason ignoring people can increase attraction is because it demonstrates emotional discipline. Most individuals react immediately to every message, every criticism, every rejection, and every moment of silence. Their emotions control their behavior. But emotionally disciplined people choose their responses instead of being controlled by them. They don't feel obligated to answer every provocation or chase every disappearing person. They understand that attention is one of the most valuable things they possess, and they refuse to spend it carelessly. This ability to remain emotionally centered creates an invisible sense of strength that people notice without fully understanding why. There is also a deeper psychological shift taking place. When you stop making other people the center of your emotional world, you naturally begin investing more energy into your own growth. Your confidence no longer depends on conversations. It begins growing through discipline, meaningful work, healthier habits, and personal achievement. As your life becomes more fulfilling, your need for constant reassurance quietly disappears. Ironically, this is often when people become more interested in you. Not because you ignored them to gain attention, but because your confidence no longer depends on receiving it. This is the difference between strategic silence and emotional manipulation. Manipulation says, "I'll ignore them so they chase me." Confidence says, "I'll protect my peace because my life has purpose beyond seeking anyone's attention." One is driven by insecurity. The other is driven by self-respect. Human psychology can sense the difference. People may temporarily respond to manipulation, but they are consistently attracted to genuine emotional independence because it reflects something they secretly admire: a person who has learned to master themselves. In the end, attraction has never belonged to the loudest voice, the fastest reply, or the person who gives away unlimited attention. It belongs to the individual whose presence is guided by purpose, whose emotions remain under control, and whose attention is offered by choice rather than desperation. When you stop chasing approval and start protecting your peace, your presence begins carrying a quiet power that words can never create. The moment your attention stops seeking validation and starts reflecting self-respect is the moment people naturally begin seeing you as truly attractive. If your attention is no longer driven by the need for validation, something remarkable begins to happen. People start wondering what changed. The person who was once always available is now focused on their own life. The endless explanations disappear. The constant pursuit comes to an end. Suddenly, the emotional dynamic shifts. This isn't because you have become cold or distant. It is because human psychology responds differently when certainty is replaced with curiosity. One of the most powerful forces influencing attraction has always been mystery. And mystery is born from what people cannot completely predict or fully understand. Most people believe attraction grows through revealing everything about themselves as quickly as possible. They think sharing every thought, every feeling, and every detail of their lives will create closeness. While honesty is essential in healthy relationships, there is an important difference between being authentic and becoming completely predictable. Human nature is naturally curious. The mind enjoys discovering, learning, and gradually understanding another person. When everything is immediately available, there is very little left to explore. But when someone reveals themselves naturally over time, instead of all at once, curiosity remains alive. This is why silence often carries more psychological weight than endless words. Silence gives people space to think. It allows them to fill the gaps with their own imagination. And the human mind is incredibly powerful at creating meaning when information is incomplete. Think about how often people replay unanswered questions in their minds. They wonder why someone reacted calmly instead of emotionally. They wonder why a person didn't chase after being ignored. They wonder what occupies someone's life when it clearly doesn't revolve around gaining attention. These questions create emotional investment because curiosity always requires mental energy. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing they must constantly explain themselves. They explain why they didn't reply immediately. They explain why they were busy. They explain every decision, every absence, and every change in behavior because they fear being misunderstood. But excessive explanation often communicates insecurity rather than confidence. Emotionally secure people understand that not every silence requires a justification. They know that those who genuinely value them will judge them by consistent character rather than demanding constant reassurance. Human psychology also responds strongly to emotional unpredictability, but not in the form of manipulation. There is a significant difference between being emotionally stable and being emotionally predictable. Predictable people react the same way every single time. They become angry immediately. They become anxious immediately. They chase immediately. Others quickly learn exactly how to influence them because their reactions never change. Emotionally disciplined individuals are different. They pause before responding. They choose silence when others expect arguments. They remain calm when others expect emotional reactions. This ability to remain composed creates a sense of mystery because people can no longer easily predict what they will do next. Notice the individuals who naturally command attention without asking for it. They rarely overshare. They don't constantly seek approval through social media, endless conversations, or unnecessary explanations. Instead, they reveal themselves through actions over time. Their confidence allows people to gradually discover who they are rather than forcing an image upon everyone they meet. This quiet restraint creates depth, and depth is often mistaken for mystery because people realize there is always something more to learn about them. Another important psychological principle is that people value what they invest in emotionally. If you provide every answer immediately, there is very little investment required from the other person. But when your life is centered on purpose instead of constant availability, people naturally become more curious about you. They begin asking questions. They pay closer attention to your actions. They start investing their own thoughts instead of relying entirely on your explanations. This is not because you intentionally ignored them. It is because your attention is now directed toward building a meaningful life, rather than constantly managing other people's perceptions of you. This is where many misunderstand the idea of ignoring people. They assume it means refusing to communicate or intentionally making others feel unimportant. But genuine emotional independence is something entirely different. It means you no longer feel compelled to interrupt your own peace just to satisfy another person's expectations. You don't ignore people because you want control over them. You simply stop giving unlimited access to your time and emotional energy. Healthy boundaries naturally create a sense of mystery because they remind others that your life has priorities beyond seeking approval. Ironically, the less you try to appear interesting, the more interesting you often become. When your attention is consumed by meaningful work, personal growth, discipline, and purpose, you stop performing for an audience. Your conversations become more natural because they are no longer driven by fear of being forgotten. Your silence becomes comfortable because it is no longer filled with anxiety. Your confidence becomes authentic because it is built on self-respect rather than constant validation. Human psychology recognizes this quiet strength even when people cannot fully explain why they are drawn toward it. Attraction has never been about making people guess your intentions through games. It has always been about living a life so complete that your attention becomes valuable simply because it is intentional. Mystery is not created by hiding who you are. It is created by allowing people to discover your character through time instead of desperately trying to prove your worth in a single moment. The moment people stop knowing exactly where your attention goes is the moment they begin wondering where your true value comes from. Curiosity may capture someone's attention, but attention alone is never enough to create lasting attraction. Many people can become interesting for a moment, yet very few become unforgettable. The difference lies in emotional control. Human psychology naturally respects those who remain calm in situations where most people lose control of themselves. This is why emotional detachment is often misunderstood. Many assume it means becoming cold, emotionless, or pretending not to care. In reality, emotional detachment has nothing to do with suppressing your feelings. It means refusing to let your emotions control your behavior. And that quiet discipline creates a level of confidence that people instinctively notice. Most people react before they think. A delayed reply creates anxiety. A disagreement creates anger. Criticism creates the immediate urge to defend themselves. Being ignored creates the desire to chase even harder. Every emotion demands an instant response. But human psychology observes these reactions carefully. People learn more about your confidence from the way you handle uncomfortable moments than from the words you speak during comfortable ones. Anyone can appear confident when everything is going well. Real confidence becomes visible when your peace remains untouched by rejection, silence, or misunderstanding. Think about how predictable emotional reactions have become. Someone receives criticism and immediately starts arguing. Someone feels ignored and instantly sends another message. Someone experiences rejection and begins explaining why they deserve another chance. These reactions may feel natural, but they also reveal something important. They show that another person's behavior has gained direct control over your emotional state. The moment someone else can predict exactly how you will react, they also gain the ability to influence your decisions. Emotional predictability quietly reduces personal power because your behavior becomes controlled by circumstances instead of conscious choice. This is why emotionally detached individuals create such a strong psychological impression. They are not rushing to prove themselves. They do not feel pressured to respond to every opinion, defend every misunderstanding, or seek validation after every disappointment. Instead, they pause. They observe. They allow emotions to settle before making decisions. That pause may seem small, but it changes everything. It creates the space where wisdom replaces impulse. And people naturally respect those who demonstrate self-control because self-control is one of the clearest signs of inner strength. There is another reason emotional detachment increases attraction. It removes pressure from relationships. People often distance themselves from individuals who constantly seek reassurance because every conversation begins carrying emotional responsibility. They feel expected to reply immediately, to provide constant attention, or to repeatedly prove their feelings. Over time, this creates exhaustion rather than closeness. Emotionally independent people create the opposite experience. They enjoy connection without making another person responsible for their happiness. Their calm presence feels comfortable because it is free from emotional desperation. Human psychology also admires those who remain composed under pressure because calmness suggests certainty. Imagine two people facing the same difficult situation. One becomes overwhelmed, reacting emotionally to every obstacle. The other remains steady, thinking carefully before responding. Without realizing it, most people instinctively trust the second individual more. Calmness communicates that this person believes they can handle uncertainty without losing themselves. That silent confidence often becomes far more attractive than loud displays of emotion because it reflects genuine emotional security. Many people mistakenly believe attraction comes from impressing others. They focus on saying the perfect words, creating the perfect image, or constantly seeking approval. But emotional detachment teaches a completely different lesson. You become attractive not because you convince people of your value, but because you stop needing them to confirm it. There is a profound psychological difference between wanting connection and needing connection. Wanting connection is healthy because it comes from abundance. Needing connection often comes from fear, and fear quietly shapes behavior in ways people immediately notice. As you become emotionally detached, Your conversations begin changing naturally. You stop over-explaining yourself because you no longer fear being misunderstood by everyone. You stop chasing after every disagreement because you understand that not every opinion deserves your energy. You stop reacting impulsively because protecting your peace becomes more important than winning arguments. This doesn't make you distant. It makes you selective. And selectiveness communicates self-respect. People begin realizing that your attention is valuable because it is no longer given away in response to every emotional trigger. Over time, this emotional discipline transforms the way others perceive you. They notice that you remain composed when criticized. They notice that you don't compete for attention. They notice that your mood doesn't depend on constant validation. This quiet consistency creates trust because it shows that your behavior is guided by principles rather than temporary emotions. Human psychology naturally gravitates towards stability. In a world where many people are controlled by impulse, the person who has mastered their own emotions stands apart without ever needing to demand attention. The greatest benefit, however, is not becoming more attractive to others. It is becoming more peaceful within yourself. When your emotions stop controlling every decision, life becomes lighter. Rejection no longer destroys your confidence. Silence no longer creates panic. Criticism no longer defines your worth. You begin responding to life instead of reacting to it. And that transformation changes every relationship because people are no longer meeting someone desperate for approval. They are meeting someone who has learned to value their own peace above temporary emotional impulses. True attraction has never been about making people admire you. It has always been about becoming so emotionally grounded that your confidence remains steady regardless of how others choose to behave. When your calmness cannot be disturbed by every opinion, every rejection, or every moment of silence, your presence begins carrying a quiet strength that people instinctively respect. The moment you master your emotions instead of being mastered by them is the moment your presence becomes impossible to ignore. Once you begin mastering your emotions, you start noticing a pattern that most people completely overlook. The harder someone chases attention, approval, or affection, the further those things seem to move away. It feels unfair because effort is supposed to produce results. In most areas of life, working harder brings greater rewards. But human relationships do not always follow that rule. In the world of attraction, desperation often weakens what confidence naturally strengthens. This is why chasing people rarely creates deeper connection. More often, it quietly pushes them further away. Most people don't realize they are chasing because it rarely looks obvious in the beginning. It starts with replying a little too quickly every single time. Then it becomes checking whether someone has seen your message. Then it turns into always starting conversations, always making plans, always trying to keep the connection alive. At first, these actions may seem harmless. They feel like signs of interest or commitment. But when they become one-sided, they slowly change the psychological balance of the relationship. Instead of creating attraction, they create emotional imbalance, where one person is constantly investing while the other simply receives. Human psychology pays close attention to emotional investment. The person investing the most usually becomes the person with the most to lose. That fear of losing the relationship quietly begins influencing every decision. You become more careful with your words because you don't want to upset them. You tolerate behavior that once would have bothered you because you're afraid of pushing them away. You stop expressing your real opinions because you worry they might lose interest. Without realizing it, your identity slowly begins revolving around keeping someone else's attention. The relationship no longer feels equal. It becomes driven by fear instead of mutual respect. This is why desperation quietly destroys attraction. Desperation is not always loud. It often hides behind excessive kindness, constant availability, endless explanations, and an inability to walk away from situations that no longer serve you. People may not consciously recognize desperation, but they almost always feel it. Human beings instinctively sense when someone's emotional stability depends too heavily on their approval, and that emotional pressure changes the atmosphere of every interaction. Instead of feeling free to enjoy your company, the other person begins feeling responsible for protecting your emotions. Attraction cannot grow where emotional pressure constantly exists. Emotionally independent people behave very differently. They value relationships, but they never sacrifice their self-respect to maintain one. They understand that genuine connection cannot be forced through persistence. If someone repeatedly fails to match their effort, they don't chase harder. They simply observe the pattern. They accept reality instead of fighting it. This quiet acceptance is not weakness. It is emotional maturity. They understand that respect begins with respecting their own time, energy, and peace before expecting anyone else to do the same. One of the most powerful psychological shifts happens the moment you stop trying to convince people to choose you. Until then, every action is driven by uncertainty. You're constantly asking yourself what more you can do, what you should say, or how you can become more interesting. But once you stop chasing, those questions disappear. Your focus returns to something much more important: your own life. You stop spending hours analyzing delayed replies because your attention is invested in meaningful goals. You stop seeking reassurance because your confidence begins coming from your own progress instead of someone else's approval. Ironically, this is often when people begin noticing you more. Not because you intentionally ignored them, but because your energy has changed. You are no longer communicating neediness. You are communicating purpose. Human psychology naturally respects people who appear emotionally complete. There is something deeply attractive about someone who enjoys relationships without depending on them for their identity. Their conversations feel lighter because they are not secretly asking to be validated. Their presence feels calmer because it is not built on fear of abandonment. That emotional freedom quietly changes the way people respond to them. Another important truth is that chasing rarely changes another person's feelings. If someone genuinely values you, they do not need endless reminders of your existence. If someone consistently overlooks your effort, increasing your effort usually strengthens the imbalance rather than solving it. Every additional attempt tells them that they can continue investing very little while still receiving unlimited attention from you. Over time, this pattern becomes the new standard of the relationship. And once unhealthy standards become normal, respect begins fading without either person fully realizing why. This does not mean you should stop caring about people. It means your care should never come at the cost of your dignity. Healthy relationships are built on reciprocity, where both individuals choose each other without constant persuasion. You should never have to chase someone into appreciating your presence. The people who truly value you will naturally create space for you in their lives. Those who don't have already given you the answer through their consistent actions. Accepting that truth may feel painful at first, but it is far less painful than spending years trying to earn attention that was never freely given. As you become more emotionally independent, something inside you changes. You no longer fear losing people who were never fully present. You no longer confuse persistence with love or availability with value. Instead, you begin protecting your attention because you understand it is one of the most valuable things you possess. Your time becomes intentional. Your energy becomes selective. Your peace becomes non-negotiable. And in that quiet transformation, attraction begins growing naturally. Not because you chased it, but because you finally stopped chasing everything that was never meant for you. True attraction has never belonged to the person who tries the hardest to be chosen. It belongs to the person who has built a life so meaningful that they never feel the need to beg for a place in someone else's. The moment you stop chasing attention is the moment your quiet confidence begins attracting the respect you never had to ask for. The moment you stop chasing people, protecting your peace, and mastering your emotions, an empty space naturally appears in your life. Most people don't know what to do with that space. They remove unhealthy attachments, but they never replace them with purpose. As a result, they eventually return to the same habits, the same people, and the same emotional dependence they worked so hard to escape. Human psychology teaches an important lesson here. It is not enough to stop seeking validation from others. You must build a life that no longer requires it. Because if your happiness still depends on another person's approval, attraction will always remain temporary, and your confidence will always remain fragile. Many people make one person the center of their emotional world without even realizing it. Their mood depends on a single message. Their confidence depends on one person's attention. Their peace depends on someone else's opinion. Every decision begins revolving around whether they will be noticed, appreciated, or accepted. Slowly, their own goals become less important. Their passions are forgotten. Their discipline weakens. They wake up thinking about another person's actions instead of their own future. This is one of the most dangerous psychological traps because it quietly convinces you that someone else's presence is more valuable than your own purpose. Human beings naturally admire people who are deeply committed to something meaningful. Think about the individuals who leave a lasting impression wherever they go. They are not constantly asking for attention. They are building businesses, mastering skills, improving their health, creating meaningful work, or pursuing goals that give their lives direction. Their attention is invested in growth rather than approval. Because of this, every interaction they have feels intentional. They are present because they choose to be, not because they are searching for someone to complete them. Purpose changes your entire psychology. The moment you wake up with something greater than seeking validation, your priorities begin shifting. You stop checking your phone every few minutes because your mind is focused on creating something valuable. You stop wondering why someone hasn't replied because your energy is invested in becoming a stronger version of yourself. The conversations that once controlled your emotions begin losing their importance. Not because you have stopped caring about people, but because your life has become too meaningful to be controlled by temporary attention. There is a powerful difference between a person who wants connection and a person who depends on it. Wanting connection is healthy because it comes from emotional abundance. You enjoy relationships, but your identity does not disappear without them. Dependence, however, creates fear. You begin fearing silence, fearing rejection, fearing distance, and fearing being forgotten. Fear changes your behavior. It makes you overthink simple situations. It makes you tolerate disrespect you would never normally accept. It makes you chase people who have already shown you that they are unwilling to invest the same effort. Attraction cannot survive where fear becomes stronger than self-respect. This is why discipline becomes one of the most attractive qualities a person can develop. Discipline creates confidence without needing applause. Every workout completed, every book finished, every new skill learned, every promise kept to yourself quietly strengthens your identity. These victories may seem small, but together they create something incredibly powerful. They teach your mind that your value comes from your actions, rather than someone else's opinion. Confidence built through discipline is stable because it cannot be taken away by rejection, silence, or criticism. As your purpose becomes stronger, something else begins changing. Your conversations become lighter because you are no longer trying to impress anyone. You listen more because you are no longer waiting for the perfect opportunity to prove yourself. You stop exaggerating your achievements because your self-worth no longer depends on recognition. Ironically, this authenticity becomes magnetic. Human psychology naturally trusts people who appear comfortable with themselves. There is no hidden pressure in their presence. They are not asking to be admired. They are simply living according to their values, and that quiet certainty attracts respect far more effectively than constant self-promotion ever could. Another important truth is that purpose protects you from emotional manipulation. People can only control someone who is desperate for something they possess. If you desperately need attention, attention controls you. If you desperately need approval, approval controls you. But when your fulfillment comes from your own growth, discipline, and mission, those forms of manipulation lose their power. You become far more selective about who deserves access to your time because your time is now invested in building a meaningful future rather than filling emotional emptiness. This transformation also changes the kind of people you attract. Instead of drawing individuals who take advantage of your need for validation, you begin attracting those who respect your independence. Healthy relationships grow naturally because they are no longer built on emotional neediness. They are built on mutual respect, shared values, and balanced effort. Neither person is trying to rescue the other. Neither person is begging for attention. Two emotionally complete individuals simply choose to walk in the same direction. The irony is that many people spend years trying to become attractive by changing how others see them, when the real transformation begins by changing how they see themselves. The moment you stop measuring your worth through someone else's attention and start measuring it through your own growth, your entire presence changes. Your confidence becomes quieter. Your standards become stronger. Your peace becomes more consistent. And people notice this without you ever needing to announce it. Real attraction has never belonged to the person who seeks constant approval. It belongs to the person whose life is filled with purpose, whose discipline speaks louder than their words, and whose happiness is built from within rather than borrowed from someone else's attention. The moment your purpose becomes greater than your need for approval is the moment your presence becomes naturally unforgettable. After building a life centered on purpose instead of approval, something unexpected begins to happen. You stop worrying about whether people find you attractive because your attention is no longer focused on being admired. Instead, you become focused on becoming the strongest version of yourself. Ironically, this is the point where many people begin noticing you the most. Human psychology has always been fascinated by individuals who appear complete without needing constant recognition. There is something naturally compelling about a person who is comfortable walking their own path without asking everyone else to validate it. This is where true attraction reaches its highest level, not through manipulation, but through quiet self-mastery. Most people spend their lives trying to become someone others will chase. They carefully choose their words, adjust their personalities, hide their opinions, and constantly wonder how they are being perceived. Every decision is influenced by the hope of becoming more likable, more desirable, or more accepted. But this approach creates a hidden problem. The more your identity depends on pleasing everyone around you, the less authentic you become. And human psychology is remarkably good at sensing authenticity. People may admire a carefully created image for a short time, but they are deeply attracted to individuals whose confidence exists without constant performance. This is why the strongest people never make attraction their primary goal. Their goal is growth. They wake up each morning focused on becoming wiser, healthier, stronger, and more disciplined than they were yesterday. They do not shape their lives around being chosen by others. They shape their lives around becoming someone they genuinely respect. That internal standard changes everything, because confidence built on personal values remains stable regardless of who enters or leaves your life. One of the greatest misunderstandings about ignoring people is believing it means treating others with disrespect. Genuine emotional independence has nothing to do with arrogance. It does not involve making people feel unimportant or deliberately withholding attention to gain power over them. Those behaviors are driven by insecurity, not confidence. Real strength is much quieter. It simply means refusing to abandon your own peace in order to earn someone else's approval. You continue treating people with kindness, but you no longer sacrifice your dignity just to keep their attention. That balance between respect for others and respect for yourself is what creates lasting attraction. Human psychology naturally trusts people who remain consistent. Think about someone whose personality changes depending on who they are talking to. Around one group, they appear confident. Around another, they become insecure. Around someone they admire, they suddenly lose their opinions and begin seeking acceptance. This inconsistency creates uncertainty because people never know who they are really meeting. Emotionally grounded individuals are different. Their principles remain steady regardless of the situation. They are respectful without becoming submissive. They are confident without becoming arrogant. They remain true to themselves whether they receive admiration or criticism. This consistency quietly builds trust, and trust is one of the strongest foundations of genuine attraction. There is another psychological reason why emotionally independent people become unforgettable. They never make others feel responsible for their happiness. Spending time with them feels refreshing because there is no hidden pressure to constantly reassure, entertain, or validate them. Their happiness already has a foundation built from purpose, discipline, and self-respect. Relationships become something they enjoy rather than something they emotionally depend upon. This creates freedom, and freedom allows authentic connection to grow naturally instead of being forced through fear or obligation. Ironically, many of the people who once overlooked you may eventually begin paying closer attention. They notice your calmness. They notice that you no longer compete for recognition. They notice that your life continues moving forward without seeking their approval. Curiosity begins replacing certainty because they expected you to keep chasing, but instead they see someone whose confidence has quietly matured. However, this is where emotional wisdom becomes essential. The goal is never to celebrate because people finally noticed you. The goal is to reach a point where whether they notice you or not no longer changes the direction of your life. When you reach that stage, your decisions become much clearer. You no longer accept one-sided relationships simply because you fear being alone. You no longer tolerate disrespect just to avoid rejection. You stop confusing attention with affection and popularity with genuine connection. Instead, you naturally gravitate toward people who respect your boundaries, appreciate your presence, and match your effort. Your standards rise because your self-respect has grown stronger. And as your standards rise, the quality of your relationships begins improving as well. Perhaps the greatest transformation of all is that you stop trying to create attraction and begin creating character. Character lasts when appearances fade. Character remains when attention disappears. Character continues growing even when nobody is watching. Human psychology may initially notice confidence, mystery, and emotional control. But lasting admiration is almost always built on character. A disciplined mind, calm emotions, honest intentions, and unwavering self-respect create a presence that cannot be imitated because it is earned through daily choices rather than temporary techniques. At the end of the journey, you realize something that once seemed impossible. The people you were trying so hard to impress no longer determine your confidence. The opinions you once feared no longer control your decisions. The attention you once desperately wanted no longer defines your happiness. You become attractive not because you learned how to ignore people, but because you learned how to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of being accepted. That is the quiet power human psychology respects more than anything else. True attraction has never belonged to the person who demands attention. It has always belonged to the individual who values their own peace, protects their own standards, and walks forward with quiet confidence, whether anyone chooses to follow or not. The moment you stop living to be noticed and start living according to your own values is the moment your presence becomes naturally unforgettable.